Hi everyone, notes 2.4 are on solving proportions. And before we solve our proportions, we need to identify what a proportion is. And a proportion is just an equation with two ratios set equal to each other. So here's an example of a proportion. Our two ratios here are set equal to each other. Our first ratio that we see here is this 5 to 20, and then our second ratio that we see here is this 125 to 500. So I want to know, how are these proportions related to each other? And just a reminder that there's a scientific calculator at desmos.com/scientific that will be really helpful as we are doing our calculations here. So pretty much I just want to know, how do I go from 20 to 500? What am I multiplying 20 by to get to 500? Well, to figure that out, I can just divide 500 by 20 to see what I would get. So 500 divided by 20 would give me 25. So this is telling me that if I take 20 and multiply it by 25, I would get 500. So to go again from 20 to 500, I would multiply by 25. So I want to see, if I multiply 5 by 25, will that give me this 125 up here? It sure will. It's going to be 125. So how are these ratios related? This one right here is a factor of 25. We're multiplying by 25. Let's do this one right here. This is a proportion because our two ratios that are set equal to each other are 1/3. 1 to 3 is my first ratio, and then 16 to 48 is my second ratio. And I know to go from 3 to 48, I would have to multiply by 16. Let's double check. So if I do 3 times 16, I get 48. But let's say I don't know that I have to multiply by 16. All you have to do is take the 48, divide that by 3, and you see that it has a factor of 16, okay? Also, I just know to go from 1 to 16, I also have to multiply by 16. So I know that we have a factor of 16. And it doesn't matter. I chose to use compare the bottom number to the bottom number to figure out what the factor is. You can use the top number to the top number. Whatever is easiest for you, it's totally up to you. Okay? So now I want to solve the following proportions by finding the factor to relate these two ratios to each other. So for example, right here, my first ratio is 2 to 5, and my second ratio is 8 to some unknown number. I don't know what it is. So I need to figure out what my factor is. So how do I go from 2 to 8? I would multiply by 4. Well, whatever I do to my top numbers or my first numbers in my ratio, I have to do the same thing to my bottom numbers or my second number. So I would have to multiply by 4. And 5 times 4 is equal to 20. So we can say here that n equals 20. Now, sometimes we're going to go from the left ratio to the right ratio, and sometimes we're going to go from the right ratio to the left ratio. How do we know? Well, here in our first ratio, it is p to 8. In our second ratio, it is 15 to 4. So I need to go from 15 to this p, which means that I need to go from 4 to this 8. So that's how we know that we need to go from right to left. As opposed to this example, we needed to go from 5 to n, so we needed to figure out how to go from 2 to 8. Okay, so how do we go from 4 to 8? We'd multiply it by 2. It's twice as big. So to go from 15 to p, we would also multiply by 2. So that means that p would be equal to 15 times 2, which is 30. And let me just write a quick note down here. The n was equal to 5 times 4, which is 20. Okay? But sometimes the number that you're multiplying by to get from one ratio to the other ratio is not as obvious. So here, our first ratio is 8 to 3. Our second ratio is 15 to u. So I want to figure out how to go from 3 to u. But to go from 8 to 15 is not as obvious. It's going to be a decimal number. So instead, we can use cross multiplication. So how do I use cross multiplication? I can either do 3 times 15. That's one way to cross multiply, or 8 times u. But because u is unknown, I'm going to do 3 times 15, and that gives me 45. And then I'm going to divide by this last number right here. Divide that by 8. And that's what u is equal to. So let's go ahead and figure out what this number is going to be. So 45 divided by 8 is 5.625. So U equals 5.625. So now to figure out what A is in this example right here, I would need to cross multiply 72 by 15. And I know that I would do 72 times 15 because these are the two numbers that I actually have to cross multiply. A times 27, I don't know what A is, so I can't cross multiply there. And then I would divide that by 27. So 72 times 15 is equal to 1080, and then I would divide that by 27 I mean, and I end up getting 40. So 72 times 15 we figured out was 1080, divide that by 27, so I get 40. So A here would be equal to 40. Now, in this example here, I would have to multiply. I want to figure out what V is, right? So I have to multiply what 43.7 by 3.1 is, and then divide that by this 71.3 here. So let's go ahead and do that. So 43.7 times 3.1 is 135.47. And then I would divide that by 71.3, which is 1.9. So here we know that V would equal 1.9. I need a 1.9 here to make this ratio equal to this ratio. And then lastly, in this example here, to figure out what H is, I would have to multiply 15 by 84 and then divide that by this 18 that we have here. And I can actually do that whole thing into my calculator all in one step, but make sure you have your fraction first. And Desmos is nice because if you press the divide sign, it gives you that fraction right away. So I'm going to type in 15 times 84 all over 18, and I end up getting 70. So here, H would be equal to 70. And that's how you would solve a proportion. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you next time in class. Bye.